I'm so glad you're here. This is a replay of a live training I did inside the OTs for Pelvic Health Facebook group with Lindsey Vestal, and I wanted to make sure that everyone gets access to it. Pelvic health is such an incredibly fulfilling specialty, and it's growing so much. I've been training OT since 2018, and my goal is to have over 10,000 OTs trained by the year 2030. I'm so glad you're here learning about this specialty. I hope that you can join us in the OTs for Pelvic Health Facebook group with me, Lindsey Vestal. I will link to the group below in the show notes and description. Thank you so much. Power Hour. I am thrilled to see you all for my favorite day of the week, when we all get together and roll up our sleeves and we are together talking and inspiring each other on all things OT, all things pelvic health. I always start off these things with an icebreaker because it lets us know a little bit more about each other, and it enlivens the group because we know we're here. We know we're a little bit more about each other. And replay people, you are not off the hook. We want to hear from you as well. So today's icebreaker question is, it's kind of a simple one. What is your middle name? What's your middle name? It's amazing. I remember working for years alongside colleagues and never knowing their middle name. And then there was remarkably some story around how they got their middle name. So for example, my son's middle name is actually my maiden name, which is Green. So it just tells you a little bit more about their background, and it's kind of a beautiful thing to get to know them a little better. So my middle name is Alexandra. I'm throwing that in the comments. Let me know what your middle name is. And replay, please. We'd love to hear from you as well. So today's topic is all about when the issues aren't in the tissues, and how, as OTs in pelvic health, we can identify the role of central sensitization in clients. And when we identify that, how we may tap into a different set of skills that we have to get our client to meet their goals. So this particular client is a client with constipation. So let me introduce her to you, and we're going to talk a little bit, roll up our sleeves together as we do an OT Empower Hour, and try to figure this out together. All right, we've got a handful of people joining us. I want to hear from you. What is your middle name? All right, so Diane was a client of mine who was 70 years old. She had just turned 70. And she was actually one of my first clients when I started the functional pelvis. It was one of my very first clients, and you know how those first clients stick with you. And I want to share with you what I learned from our experience together, because I truly believe that our clients are our greatest teachers. And when we reflect on our work together, our sessions together, it really helps us grow in capacity to serve our clients and to be the best practitioners we can be. Brooke's middle name is Harris, which was her maiden name as well. That's fantastic. Tara's middle name is Lynn. I love it. I mean, we can have a full name here. Alexandra Lynn Harris. Beautiful, beautiful. Just come to OT Empower Hour to come up with your pen name. All right. So a little bit more about Diane. Diane was in New York City, and she was an environmental lawyer. She was a very active member of her community. She was retired, and she attended the Opera Weekly. She was a member of her community organization for environmental advocacy within Manhattan, and she was married, and she was a member of a walking club on the Upper West Side, where she walked about 1.5 miles daily with her 3 or 4 solid friends. And when Diane came to see me, her chief concern was urinary urgency, which she had been experiencing for about 2 years. She also had lower back pain and chronic constipation. Now, the back pain and the urinary urgency were the 2 new symptoms. The constipation at this point was probably close to 40 years old. She had had multiple medical and urological workups and GI workups with no significant findings, okay? And the symptoms were fluctuating throughout the day, but they typically got worse at nighttime. And this had been the case for about the last 4 or 5 months by the time she came and saw me. So as OTs, I always recommend that we give a psychosocial outcome measure, right, to our clients. And the ones that I had administered to Diane told me that depression, stress, and anxiety were all within normal levels. The pain catastrophizing scale was about 35 out of 52. And she had a bias towards rumination. So the pain catastrophizing scale told me that she had a bias towards rumination. I also gave her the Fremantle Back Awareness Questionnaire, and she scored 28 out of 36. Now, the higher you score on these, the more evocative it is, the more you know we're dealing with, in this case, rumination. In this case, the Fremantle tells us a little bit about the relationship between like body perception, nociception, sensitivity, distress, and just general beliefs about back pain, and how the contribution of these factors might play in explaining their experience. Okay, so here I am, I was a new OT, new in my own company, right? Had several years of experience, but was brand new in the company that was under my name, the Functional Pelvis. And I started off with tissue-based work, right? So she responded really well, and the tissue-based work I was doing was trigger point and connective tissue release. I was working on coordination of the pelvic floor. She was definitely a dyssynergic. She definitely had dyssynergic coordination. So we were focused a lot on that. We did postural education. We did lots of education around hydration, the role of supplements like magnesium, pelvic floor release techniques. We talked about minimizing sitting. We talked about bladder irritants. We talked about why it's important to not just in case pee. Diane had a solid exercise program even before she met me that was really grounded in yin yoga. And her symptoms were pretty minimal throughout the day and the night while we worked together for about 6 weeks. Her coordination became phenomenal. She was no longer dyssynergic. Her back pain had significantly changed. I would say a shift happened around 2 or 3 weeks in working together. And her frequency went from every 30 minutes to every hour and a half. Fantastic, fantastic. I was feeling on cloud nine, just opened my company, was feeling like we were really moving forward. So then Diane called me because she had a flare-up. She had a pretty significant flare-up that brought her back to baseline symptoms. So everything she had when she first met me, she was right back at it, and they were worse at night. So we've got about 8 people joining us live. My question is, what would you do? What would you do in this case where you were 6 weeks into your protocol, you were doing all of your tissue-based work, all of your education, all the things we do so well, and your client calls you and she's got a flare-up? Throw them in the comments. Let me know. I love imagining us together and this being really interactive. So let's be curious together. In this situation, what would you do? And if you're on replay, throw them in the comments, because the comments come in lined up with our conversation. So we sort of know when you're putting the comment in. And then, in the sequence of our time event, we know when we had our big conversation around what I actually did. So throw them in, please, by all means. What would we do with this client who seems to be plateauing? So I'll tell you what I did. I knew that I gave her those psychosocial outcome measures, right? And I knew I should do this. I felt like all the PTs I had followed, I never saw them give psychosocial questionnaires, so I really felt compelled to do this. But I'm going to be completely honest with you. I didn't know what to do with them. I knew I needed to administer these outcome measures, but I didn't know what to do with the information, right? So Mary says, trying to figure out if there had been any changes in daily routine and stress factors. Love that. Excellent, Mary. Tara says, return to testing. So I'm guessing you mean like retest and retest, Tara, or do you mean have her go back for some medical workup? Brooke says, ask if anything in lifestyle has changed, stress. Beautiful, spot on. I love all of this. Wonderful contributions. So I took out her outcome measures, right? So she had filled them out. I had filed them away. I didn't know what to do with them. I had only been mentoring with PTs. I didn't know what I was supposed to do with this information. So here I am, sweating up a storm. I just hung up the phone call with the client telling me she has a flare-up, and I took them out, right? And at this point, if you're working with a client for 6 weeks and a flare-up happens, it's really helpful to take a step back and look at the whole story again, right? I also love asking questions like Brooke and Mary have suggested, right? What has changed in your life? What changes in routine are there, right? What could have changed here? And I love that idea. I did some of that, and it wasn't incredibly productive. I didn't get any red flags, anything kind of telling me, that I needed to go down that direction. So then I started going over my outcome measures, and here's what really popped out at me. There was a 2-year history. So she had been experiencing these new symptoms of low back pain and urinary urgency. Was a 2-year history. Constipation had dated much further back. Second key indicator was that the tissue issues resolved, yet the client had experienced a flare-up, right? So the issues in the tissues were gone. There was, the coordination was great. No dyssynergia was there, right? But here was a flare-up. Third thing was she had an increase in nighttime symptoms, right? So nighttime stuff had changed, which we know that changes in oxygen uptake when we're laying down and when we're sleeping really affect nerve sensitivity at night. So this can increase our pain experience. And I also reminded myself there was no significant medical findings, right? So looking over all of this and looking at my outcome measures and thinking about these key facts that I wrote down from our initial evaluation, I started playing around with this idea of central sensitization. So when we suspect central sensitization, what should we do? You guys have any thoughts around that? When we've addressed everything that Mary, Brooke, and Tara have said, nothing really stands out at us, and we're just sitting there going, okay, what next? What do I do next? And if we're wondering if it's central sensitization, I'd love to hear from you. You guys have any ideas on what we would do next if that was the case, if we wanted to test that theory? Because so much of pelvic health is being comfortable with test to retest, is being comfortable with experimenting with individual factors that really your intuition and your science. So it's an art and a science that your brain is kind of going, what should I do next? And again, I went through that litany of things and I decided I'm going to see if this is central sensitization, right? So to remind everybody, central sensitization is basically when it's not just an acute injury. So it's not just something that happens locally to me, but it's an accumulation over time to the point that maybe things that wouldn't normally be uncomfortable are uncomfortable. So we're kind of having an aggrandized, let's say, reaction to things because now it's about the central nervous system and it's not about the local tissues. So that's what my working theory was. So I'm going to share with you what I did. And in doing so, I'm going to review with you some of the psychosocial tools that I use to help Diane. And by the way, these exact tools are in my new course, OT Elevate. It categorizes 30 tools, over 3 hours worth of tools, into the 3 main categories of tools we have, which are manual, behavioral, and psychosocial. And I'm also going to throw my treatment chart of organizing these 30 tools for you to take a peek at. I'm going to throw them into the comments because when I first started, remember, this is a story from when I began my practice, I didn't have all of the tools fresh in my mind. I very much would go back home, look through my notes, and come with a plan for the next session. So this treatment chart that I'm going to share with you help to organize my thoughts around what I can do with her, remind me of what I have done with her. And again, OT Elevate, my new course, goes into great depth around all of these tools, and they're quick and snappy. So you don't have to wade through like a 30-minute lesson. They're less than 3 minutes each, and you just review them before you walk in with a client to refresh yourself. Okay, so tool number 1 is pain education. All right. So I am a huge fan of pain education. I think it's so key to client recovery. So you may know that the IASP definition of pain was recently updated just 2 years ago in 2020. The time it was updated before that was 1979. Yes, indeed, it was time. And so we know pain has a new definition, and we know that sharing pain science is important with our clients. But here's the thing. How do we do this in a way where you and I, if we were in a room together, Tara, Brooke, Mary, you guys are here with me, right? We would probably geek out. We would probably go off on some terminology that really won't resonate with our clients. And that's probably how I did this 10 years ago. I was probably really bad at explaining central sensitization and pain science, but I'll tell you what, it has been my goal as an OT to get better and better and better at this, because I have seen it be such a fundamental shift, especially with our clients experiencing central sensitization. So I did just that, right? And in order to help her understand pain science, I used the Explain Pain model, talking about how pain is actually an output of the brain based on the context of our client's individual biopsychosocial factors. So for example, with my first daughter, my firstborn, you know, as all new parents tend to do, the moment she would fall, I would quickly run over to her with quickness in my steps, super eager. Oh my gosh, Avery, are you okay? Like, what happened? Very concerned, right? Well, what would have been different if, let's say, I watched her from afar, I was making sure she was okay, but what if I giggled and said, silly Avery, right? What if I didn't perseverate on a potential injury she could have had? And I think these are some of the factors that go into our client's own ability to process sensation in their body. So this is why it's the context of their own individual factors, some of which we'll know, some of which we won't, but listening to their words, because we know words matter. I have an entire section on that in OT Elevate because I believe in it so much. And I believe that some of the concepts that elevate us as a professional in this field is knowing the latest on pain science, knowing how to really be present and build rapport with our clients in order to let them know their words matter, and that we're really building that therapeutic relationship by listening to them, really, really listening to them. Another tool I love to use with my biopsychosocial model, with explaining pain, is the TED Talk by Lorimer Moseley. If you haven't heard that, I'm going to drop it in the comment section. Listen to it today if you can, and find the section that you want to share with your clients, because I would explain pain to my clients and explain pain being an output versus an input. But I find when someone like Lorimer Moseley, who's an expert storyteller, reiterates what I'm saying via his walk in the Australian outback, like, it really connects the dots for our clients, and they come back and they're like enthusiastic to share how they've internalized it and how they told their partner about it, and it just helps them to process it that much more. We also talked about the activities that caused her symptoms to flare up. So I'm going to tell you this from a biopsychosocial perspective. So both Mary and Brooke said, has anything changed in their life? So I was asking more about the past in my question. Has anything changed? How is your relationship with your partner? Any changes with your advocacy organization for your environmental causes? I didn't think to ask forward. So listen to this. Listen what's happening for her next that had a huge impact on her symptoms. So a family member of hers, her sister, whom she was very, very close to, was coming to visit and stay with her. And even though she came to me for urinary frequency, I was constantly weaving in how constipation, which she had written off as a lifelong condition, was actually very much involved in her new symptoms. She and I had a hard time with this because she dismissed this initially. She really took her constipation for granted. She had it for so long. No, that's not my issue, right? That's just something my mom had and my sister,
But I really helped her to see the connections between this part of her body and how close the muscles are. And this was a huge revelation for her. And it often is for our clients, because some of those colorectal issues are predating why they're coming to see us now, especially with pre and postnatal people, right? They come to see us, they just had a baby. It's often the thing that makes a new symptom appear that gets their attention. But that constipation that had been in the background for 10 plus years was already a precursor to some of the urinary issues. So sometimes we have to go back and address the colorectal issues in order to see a change in the urinary issues. So she wasn't anxious about her sister visiting. She was very close to her. She was really anticipating the visit. But here's where the psychosocial turn came in. She remembers growing up in a very modest house that had one bathroom, and it was shared by 8 siblings. One bathroom shared by 8 siblings. And the walls of the house were very thin. So nothing was kept secret for very long in this house. And she remembers holding her poop until everyone went to bed in an effort to have some privacy. Okay? This is very significant. So even though she now was very well established, had a beautiful apartment, I remember it clear as day, on the Upper West Side, she had 3 bathrooms with enough privacy for all. When her sister came to visit her, this feeling became alive in her again. And this was a huge revelation for her, because she realized its relevance with her sister's upcoming visit, right? Originally, she thought, why would my sister bring upon any of these feelings? We're extremely close. She actually relieves a lot of stress for me while she's here. Then when I was able to tie it back into the constipation for her, which she didn't think was her primary condition, you see how it started to make sense for her. And her beliefs around the condition and how the past was still very much alive for her. So this led us to exploring the beliefs around the condition, aggravators, activities, right? And how maybe her behavior has changed in accordance with her beliefs around her condition. So now I'm going back to some of that fear avoidance, that rumination that she was having, that we found out from the pain catastrophizing scale. And that's what guided me there. Okay. And in terms of aggravating activities, sorry if you hear some noise in the background. It sounds like maybe one of my neighbors is doing some construction. Just started. Lovely timing with OT and Power Hour. So in terms of her aggravating activities, actually even her yin yoga had started to bother her. So this is also another huge key tip-off to central sensitization, when a very relaxing activity starts to become an aggravating factor. Any activity our clients return to must be well beneath any pain potential. So 20 minutes of yoga was aggravating her symptoms, so I asked her to go to 10, right? I asked her to go to 10, checked in with her, that was okay, and then every time we met, we would increase that level by a few minutes. And I was very clear in articulating with her how she should change that even between sessions if she starts to feel that those aggravating symptoms reappear. So for her, again, urinary urgency and lower back pain. We worked on keeping all activities, actually, physical, social, stressful, even stimulating activities, so coffee, alcohol, well beneath the pain potential. And then we were gradually exposing her over time to increasing these activities. So these flare-ups really provide us, I think, a very positive peek into a zone of tissue tolerance and a ceiling where we stay well under. It becomes a guideline for us. Our client is teaching us something. Her client's body is teaching her something and telling them, this is my limit. And if we teach them to listen to those limits, our zone of tolerance becomes safer and safer, and they can feel the power of listening to their own body. So this is a process. This can take time. And tissue issues are sometimes resolved when we look beyond the tissue. And I think as OTs, we innately know that. I think another thing that really factored in with her was the fear of having an accident, right? Which can cause that gentle constant contraction of the pelvic floor muscles, resulting in those feelings of like constant severe urgency to urinate. And she had actually felt this since we had done our tissue work together 6 weeks before her flare-up. So she actually kind of knew when the flare-up happened, like, wait a second, I'm feeling that again. I'm feeling that clenching that we talked about, like, wow, what's happening here? And so we know that we just can't revert back to that old state without some provocation. And in this case, it was that central sensitization. So approaching her with this central sensitization biopsychosocial approach made a world of difference for her symptoms. The tissue work was necessary. We're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? That tissue work was so fundamental in building her understanding. But her body taught us in the course of working together that we needed to go beyond the tissues. And we needed to then, that was what was required to go past and to help her meet those goals and to help her manage any potential flare-ups. And guess what? We were really able to work on her constipation then, because she, with her sister's visit, it really shed light on how she would keep her stool in until the opportunistic time when the house was asleep and she could sneak into the bathroom and have some privacy. And when we were talking about it, I remember this is like, I got so excited because this is when a light bulb moment really went off for me. When she was talking about her having to sneak into that one bedroom while her 7 siblings were asleep, she remembers that feeling and her pelvic floor was clenching as she was telling me the story. And she told me that. She was able to say, you know, that feeling that you told me that I get when I'm really like tightening down there, as I'm telling you the story, I'm feeling it, because that's what her body needed to do to keep that stool in when she was waiting for the most opportunistic time to go. Love when those connections happen. Love when the client can really bring it back full circle for us. Awesome. So that was my story. I would love to open up the floor to any questions you may have. We have close to 10 people joining us. Do you guys have any experience with central sensitization? Do you have any experience with recognizing when we need to move beyond a tissue-based approach? And the great news is it seems like the construction has stopped. So I'll be able to hear myself talking. Okay, I will keep watching the comment section, and as questions come in either during the replay when you're dropping in your middle name and when you're asking any questions or contributing to the conversation, I'll be sure to circle back around and check out what you've said. I'm going to go ahead and drop in the treatment chart with showing the 30 tools in the comment section. I'm also going to throw in the Laura Mosley YouTube video. That's fantastic to share with your clients. Mary says she feels like this really opened up her eyes to some other things to look at. Mary, I'm thrilled. That's exactly why we do these OT Empower Hours. It's about inspiring new innovative ideas that always come back to our home base of the OT lens, because that's what it's all about. We do not need to be OTs and PTs clothing. We can truly embrace our viewpoint of that holistic approach in everything we do, still use our tissue manual based work, still have that, but add on to it when the case would demand it, such as what I did with Diane in this case study. Tara says, with the geriatric client, it is so important to ask about past experiences and medications. Oh my goodness, 100%. So Tara, with colorectal stuff, medications is huge. And so I have an entire section in OT Elevate, my course that just came out this week, that talks about the role of medications and the side effects on them, and so that we can know, right, how much of that has an impact on our client's experience, because that really does help us, and it helps us empower them with that knowledge, because they can oftentimes go back to their medical practitioner and say, you know what, a very common side effect of this medication I'm on is constipation. Is there an alternative we can try so that I can start to work on some other quality of life issues that I have? Mary says, I have someone who already wants to be my first client when I open up my business and have a history of IBS, but I never thought about how that could be connected to the other stress urinary incontinence issues going on. Mary, one of my very first mentors, Tiffany Lee, who's in our group and who has a guest module in OT Elevate, and her partner, Jane Kaufman, said that the poop drives the pee. The poop drives the pee. And that's the thing that I really want to bring home with today's conversation, in addition to having a pain centralization approach, is that the poop is such a huge connector to the pelvic floor. So when we have, let's say, constipation, in this case with my client Diane, she had stool backed up in her body, which was taking up a whole lot of space. And it was putting pressure on the bladder, causing that urinary urge. So her newer symptoms, and contributing to low back pain. So all of her new symptoms, which is why she sought me out, actually went back and predated 20, 30 years because of the constipation. So that's actually one of the reasons why I developed OT Elevate, because I really feel like when we're plateauing with our clients, when our usual tools aren't making a difference, and maybe we're focusing on why they came to see us, and it can feel like we're deterring. It can feel like we're going off track when we bring up older issues, and they don't understand. They're like, but I'm here because I'm leaking urine. Why are we talking about my constipation? When we can educate them and explain to them that actually the anal triangle is 50% of the pelvic floor, they can start to realize, oh my goodness, yeah, I'm actually neglecting the other half of the pelvic floor. And when we start bringing out the biopsychosocial stories that often go back to childhood, past experiences, as Tara said, we can start to see how actually starting with colorectal or bringing colorectal stuff in very early on can absolutely move the needle with urinary issues. So I'm so glad that you said that, Mary. Brooke says, I have a patient with a history of chronic stroke, and we dealt with something like this after exhausting all other ideas. I love how it relates to all diagnoses and really looking at the whole person. Beautifully said, Brooke. You are spot on with that. The whole person, if we listen to our clients, they will always tell us what they need, right? We are their guides. We are their facilitators. And this is where, when we get in that like blinders, issues in the tissues mode, we're really missing that opportunity to allow the client to feel their own body and power and self-efficacy. And again, this is the power of being an OT, because we can dip into the manual skills, we can dip into behavioral, we can dip into the psychosocial. And so those three categories of tools are where it's at. So I'm gonna, without further ado, I'm gonna drop that treatment chart in the comment section so you guys can organize your thoughts around those three tools. And then if this appeals to you in OT Elevate, I lay them all out for you. I've got 3 hours of tools in the course that you can just jump into before a treatment session and look at it and remind yourself of the manual, of the behavioral, of the psychosocial tools that are at your disposal. And again, so relevant with even urinary incontinence, urge incontinence, pain clients, because the poop drives the pee. All right, such a pleasure to see you all today. Thank you for all of your amazing comments. Replay people, I hope that you can contribute to the conversation as well, because we always love to see what you have to say. If you guys have any ideas for future OTM Power Hours, please email me or drop them in the comments. I want to bring you guys what you want to hear, and I love building this community and sharing and learning right alongside with you. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone, and I can't wait to see you next time. I will drop the URL for OT Elevate if you'd like. The course is actually available anytime. It's not like OT Pioneers. It's available anytime, but the price does increase by $50 this Saturday. So if you want to get in on the inaugural rate, join us before Saturday. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day.